All right, so we've got a stack of readings here on the philosophy of money and finance. Seems like someone wants to dig a little deeper than just, what's in their wallet.
Really fascinating stuff, actually. We use money every day, but how often do we stop and think about the systems and the ideas behind it all?
Exactly. And that's what we're here for, right?
Yeah.
This deep dive is going to take us to these excerpts and see what philosophers have to say about money. Everything from like its very essence to the ethical questions it brings up. Not your typical finance lecture.
Definitely not. Get ready for some aha moments because this stuff can really change how you see money.
I'm intrigued already. So where do we even begin with something like money? I mean, it seems so simple, but then again,
Well, you gotta start with the basics, right? What is money? Seems obvious, but it's a question philosophers have been debating for centuries, literally.
okay. Yeah, I'm starting to realize this might be a little more complicated than I thought.
One way to look at it is through this thing called the commodity theory of money. Think back to the gold standard, which actually pops up in Bitcoins left and right. Basically, this theory says money gets its value from something physical, like gold or silver, a commodity.
Makes sense, at least it used to, but what about now? Most of my money is, like, digital. Don't even touch cash that much anymore.
And that's where things get really interesting. The rise of digital money throws a bit of a wrench in the commodity theory. Instead, you have to start thinking about money in terms of credit.
Credit, like credit cards and loans and stuff.
Kind of. The excerpt from The Social Ontology of Money dives into this. It basically says that money, at its core, is a social agreement. It's less about the physical thing, the dollar bill or the gold coin, and more about the shared belief that those things have value, that you can exchange them.
So almost like an invisible web of trust and promises.
Exactly. Your credit card only works because we all agree as a society that this little plastic rectangle means you have a certain amount of buying power. It's kind of wild when you think about it.
It really is. And speaking of systems of trust and digital things, we can't forget about cryptocurrency. Where does that fit into all of this?
Ah, now you're talking. Cryptocurrency, especially Bitcoin, really throws a curveball into these theories. It's not tied to any physical commodity like gold, and it's not issued by a central bank either. Really challenges both the commodity and the credit theories.
So how do we make sense of it then?
Well, the readings on Bitcoin, especially from the libertarian perspective, argue that it's kind of like going back to a more individualistic kind of money, taking some power away from governments and putting more control back in the hands of individuals.
So it's about the ideology behind it as much as the technology itself.
Yeah, it's about freedom and autonomy in the financial world. But like anything, there's another side to consider. Bitcoin's left and right brings up some potential downsides. Like, what does it mean for a government's ability to manage the economy, deal with things like recessions?
And all the potential for misuse we hear about in the news.
Right, exactly. So even as we explore these new forms of money, those age-old questions about regulation, oversight, the balance between individual freedom and collective responsibility, those are still front and center. They're kind of baked into how we think about and interact with money.
It's amazing to me how something we use every day can be so complex. We've gone from gold coins to digital tokens to questioning the role of governments, and we're just getting started.
Oh, this is just the tip of the iceberg. Now that we've scratched the surface of what money is, we can get into the really interesting stuff, the ethics of it all.
Okay, yeah, let's get into it. Now, this is where things get really interesting for me. I've always wondered about this whole ethics of money thing. Can we even talk about money and ethics in the same sentence? They always seem kind of at odds.
Yeah, that's a question philosophers have been wrestling with forever.
It does make you wonder when you see, those images of like greedy bankers and everything. Like, can you really be ethical and successful in finance at the same time?
It's not always a comfortable conversation.
For sure. So how do these readings approach that question?
Well, the excerpt is the pursuit of money incompatible with morality. Really gets into the weeds on this one. Lays out some pretty different viewpoints, actually. Like, on the one hand, you've got this socialist perspective, right? They're arguing that the whole idea of profit is just morally wrong, full stop.
Wow. Okay.
Right. And then you've got someone like Tilden coming in with the complete opposite take. Like, it's actually our duty to accumulate wealth.
Wait, a duty to be wealthy.
Yeah, it's a pretty wild claim when you think about it. But I think whether you buy that or not, it makes you think twice about your own relationship with wealth and morality. Like, what do we believe about those things? And then it forces you to consider this connection between, like, personal gain and the greater good.
So it's not necessarily about condemning all wealth. It's more about how you get it and what you do with it.
Now you're getting it. And that kind of leads us to another point that comes up in these readings, particularly around this whole idea of virtue theory. Can virtues like honesty, prudence, heck, even empathy, can those things even exist in the financial world? Or do they just get chucked out the window when it's all about the bottom line?
I mean, I got to say, you don't hear the words virtuous and finance used together very often.
It does seem kind of contradictory, right? But think about it. Even in a cutthroat market, there's still space for ethical behavior. Like, imagine a financial advisor who's truly putting their clients' best interests first. Prioritizing their long-term well-being over just making a quick buck off some risky investment. Or a lender who's offering fair and transparent loan terms, even though they could probably get away with charging way more.
Okay, yeah, I see what you mean. There's a difference between making money ethically and just chasing the biggest returns, whatever it takes.
Exactly. But then you have those massive systemic issues, right? Like, think about the 2008 financial crisis. Hard to see how individual virtue would have prevented something like that.
That's where things get really complicated. How do you hold an entire system accountable?
That's why that excerpt about the wrongfulness of bank contributions to financial crises is so relevant. It digs into whether banks are inherently designed to be reckless or if it's the whole system that needs a rethink.
Are they saying banks are the bad guys?
It's not quite that simple. They use this example of a land loan to illustrate this. So picture this, right? A bank has to decide if they're going to approve this loan. Seems pretty low risk on its own. But what if approving that loan, along with thousands just like it, ends up contributing to a housing bubble and ultimately a full-blown financial crisis?
Oh, wow, okay.
It's suggesting that banks can become complicit in creating instability without even meaning to.
Like a domino effect, one little decision snowballing into something huge. So how do we even begin to address that? Are there even realistic solutions?
That's the million-dollar question, right?
Yeah.
Thankfully, the next batch of readings dives right into this huge challenge of regulating this whole money game.
Well, let's get to those then. What are some of the approaches they suggest? Okay, so regulating the money game. Sounds kind of intense.
Yeah, it's a big one for sure. No easy answers, but these readings offer some interesting perspectives.
Green central banking really jumped out at me. Seems like everyone expects central banks to help fight climate change these days.
Yeah, green central banking was a really interesting read. Everyone's looking for them to solve these huge problems. But the question is, can they actually do that? Can they promote sustainability without overstepping?
Right. Their main job is supposed to be keeping the economy stable, aren't they?
Exactly. And this excerpt actually brings in a bunch of different central bankers and gets their take on it.
Oh, wow.
Some are like, yeah, this is totally our lane. We need to address climate-related financial risks. But then others are worried about mission creep. Like, what are the unintended consequences of central banks getting involved in all these other issues?
It's a tough one. It's like they're walking a tightrope between economic stability and social responsibility.
Totally. And then on top of that, you have the whole transparency versus expertise debate.
Oh, yeah. That's another layer, isn't it? Should central banks be completely transparent about how they make decisions?
Right. Because on the one hand, more transparency seems good in theory. But then again, could it backfire if people don't fully understand the complexities? Like maybe it ends up undermining public trust.
Hard to say. Could go either way.
And this ties into a bigger theme from the readings. The power of knowledge and information, climate change and reflexive law, suggests that it's not enough to just throw data at the problem.
People need context.
Exactly. They need to understand what the numbers actually mean, how they connect to their lives. Only then can they make informed decisions.
So it's not just about access to information, but understanding its relevance, how it impacts us personally.
Totally. And it brings us back to this idea of money as a social contract, right? If we're going to trust the system, we need to feel like we're part of the conversation.
Not just along for the ride.
Exactly. Okay, so we've talked about central banks' transparency-informed decision-making. What other regulatory approaches did these readings explore?
Yeah, there were a few more in there.
One that stood out to me was the whole connection between credit wealth inequality and social justice.
Yeah, credit and distributive justice really went there.
Really makes you think. Because is access to credit truly equal? Or does the system favor those who already have more?
Such a relevant issue right now with this growing gap between the rich and the poor.
For sure. And the excerpt breaks down how different types of credit, like secured versus unsecured loans, can actually either reinforce or challenge existing power structures. It's not enough to just provide more credit. We need to look at the terms, the conditions, who actually benefits and who gets left behind.
It's about building a system that's actually fair, where everyone has a real shot at success.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's what makes this whole exploration of the philosophy of money so important. It's not just some abstract thought experiment. It's about understanding how money shapes our lives, our communities, the world around us.
This deep dive has been amazing. It's really changed how I think about something I used to take for granted.
It's been quite a journey. And as you continue thinking about all of this, here's a final thought to chew on.
I'm ready.
Imagine you could redesign the financial system from scratch. What principles would you base it on? What would a truly just and sustainable financial future look like?
Wow. That's a powerful question.
No easy answers, but even asking it can change how we view money and its role in our own lives.
Definitely gives you a lot to think about. Thanks for taking this deep dive with me. Until next time.